Hello, everybody. It's Simon Holden here for Holden Source. He's got a very, very special edition today with Neil Clark, the journalist and author who I'm a big fan of, who's written an excellent book that I want to pick his brains about jump jockeys since 1945 to the present day. And while we've got Neil here, it would be a shame not to pick his brains about the Cheltenham Festival. And today, after we talked about the champion hurdle with Neil Maurice, we're going to talk about all things Gold Cup, past and present, Gold Cups that have been important to us, or ones we look back on either financially or just for the pleasure of the event. And then we'll bring it up to date, and I'll ask Neil about this year's blue ribboned event, the Gold Cup. So firstly, thank you for your time, Neil. It's much appreciated. I hope it finds you well and you're all excited.
Thanks for having me on, Simon. Really, thanks a lot. Yeah, very well, thanks. I can't wait for next week.
Yes, we're in the racing equivalent of a phony war now, aren't we?
Yes.
Everybody's got their battalions fixed. I won't talk with too much military imagery at the moment. It wouldn't be appropriate, but everyone's ready. And now it's that bookmakers are ready. We're ready as punters. The people involved must just be walking around their stables, checking on the horses on a 10-minute basis to make sure.
Yeah, quite.
Because we do know, as always happens at Cheltenham, there's always a sad late story where somebody doesn't turn up. So let's hope, firstly, we all get there first thing Tuesday. Now, let's talk about your book, Neil. It's a fascinating book.
Yeah.
I come from the standpoint that all jockeys are slightly mad, but jumps jockeys are insane. I say that because whenever I've gone racing, and I've written about this many times, but I suggest to anybody who's going to Cheltenham this year, anybody who goes to any jumps meeting, take 20 minutes and walk down to the second last fence, somewhere where it's quiet, and stand there and watch them as they come by. Watch them as they jump, watch the noise, watch the shouting, something that never comes over on normal media. And then be very careful about criticizing a bad ride or anything like that, because it's awe-inspiring stuff. And these guys know that there's always, I remember talking to Steve Smith-Eccles, and he said one of the reasons why in the last few years of his career, he was so keen to enjoy himself and whatever, because he knew that he was doing a job where he was going to get injured regularly. So he did have that kind of seize the day. And it's one of the few employments where you're pretty much guaranteed to get regularly injured.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my book, it's the first time in one volume that the story of all the post-war champion jump jockeys has been told. There's been biographies written about a few of them, but incredibly, some of the ones who won multiple titles haven't even had a book written about them. Like Tim Maloney, for example, who was a 5 times champion, the Rubber Man, they called him because he kept bouncing back. There had been no biography written about him. So I thought, this is all wrong. We've got these great heroes one and all, going back to 1945, and I thought somebody's got to put them together in one book and tell their remarkable story, and they really are remarkable. The ones who were riding in the 1940s and 50s, well, I mean, the bravery really is off the scale. You may call it insanity or craziness, actually, because in those days, don't forget, they had cork. The helmets were cork helmets if they wore them at all. They broke on impact. No chin straps, no body protectors, back protectors, etc. Metal railings at the courses. It was extremely dangerous. But don't forget, these early champions, Simon, were people who had saw action in World War II. There was a real kind of World War II if you like, RAF or Army spirit about these guys. They'd faced big dangers in the war, fighting the Germans. And for them, riding around Hereford or Taunton without any real health and safety at all, it was a breeze. And the camaraderie really was quite terrific. One of the most remarkable characters in the book, and they're all remarkable, was a chap called Jack Dowdswell, who was the champion jump jockey in the season 1946-7 that was hit by an incredibly severe winter, a big freeze, which meant a real big freeze, which meant that we didn't get any racing from January till mid-March. And he broke, literally every bone in his body, several times over. he was Mr. Indestructible, because so many stories about him. There was one occasion when he was taken off from a racecourse after a horrific fall. He was unconscious in the ambulance, and the medical orderlies were chatting about him, and one of them said, "Poor chap, he'll never ride again." And then, you know, what they thought, the body was unconscious. They thought Jack rose up, put the sheet away, and said, "Yes, I bloody well will." That was Jack Dowdswell. You know, you literally had to kill him to stop him from riding, and he spent probably more time in ambulances than probably any other person in the 20th century. He was always going off to the John Radcliffe in Oxford or whatever after a crushing fall, and he was back as soon as he could. And he lived all that. He was riding the most dangerous time you could be a jumps jockey. He lived to the ripe old age of 94. And it was always cheerful. So, I mean, he's just an incredible character. You can't read his story and not be inspired by him, really.
Yeah, that reminds me of the nickname for Stan Meller, Cart Meller Man, because every
Yes,
time he went there, he ended up on a stretcher.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. I mean, Stan's fascinating as well, because he was the kind of Jackie Stewart of jump racing, in the sense that he was a multiple champion. He won 3 titles, and he could and should have won a lot more because he was competitive, you know, into the early 1970s. I mean, he won his first 3 titles in the first 3 years of the 60s, but he was still challenging for the title into the 70s. He really did so much for this health and safety aspects of it, bringing in, you know, he modeled his first back protector. He sort of liaised with race courses on getting more medical staff there, and a lot of other things he did. So he was very much like the Jackie Stewart, and hugely popular. I mean, you won't hear a bad word said about Stan Muller from anybody in racing, and his fellow jockeys really appreciated what he did. So that by the 70s, even though it's still a dangerous sport, and you're still getting jockeys killed in the 70s, people like Doug Barrett, people remember, killed in the 1973 Whitbread, it was still safer than it was, you know, when Jack Dowswell was riding in the late 40s, and a lot of that was to do with Stan Muller.
And the early part of the book, the post-war years, just for me, the sheer difficulty in these guys getting around the country in a way that we forget, that it was just such an incredible achievement that they would be traveling, and it must have been that real kind of Corinthian spirit, like you say, the camaraderie in those years, that we look at the modern world and the travel arrangements of jockeys, and the very top ones, of course, the sort of onus helicopter flying off to here and there, but these guys, just an effort to get there in the first place, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, racing, it tended to be more regionalized in the late 40s. So you would rarely go, if you were based in Lambourne, you would very rarely, I mean, going up to Carlisle, somewhere like that would be unthinkable, really. Tim Maloney was the first of the champions to actually use a helicopter, but that was very much cutting edge 1950s. That wouldn't have been absolutely routine for anybody at that point. And in fact, there's a great story about Tim Maloney going to the races in the book. Tim Maloney was going with his brother Martin Maloney. People never championed in England because he was, of course, champion in Ireland. He came over and did incredibly well, arguably one of the greatest horsemen of all time. He won classics on the flat in Ireland, as well as Irish National, and was a top jumps jockey as well. He was coming in a car with his brother Tim and with a jockey called Leo McMurrow, who was a Grand National winning jockey. He won the 1949 National on Russian horse called Russian Hero. They were traveling to Leicester races and coming from Lincolnshire, and their car crashed and overturned near Newark in Nottinghamshire. And 3 jockeys, the car's overturned. They actually walk away, literally brush themselves down, put the thumbs up, get a lift, going to the races. We've got to go to Leicester races. Went to Leicester races. Tim, I think, rode 2 winners and Martin 1. And Leo McMurrow had a crashing fall off Russian Hero. I've got the photograph. It's a crashing fall. Both horse and rider were okay. So you could say they had some guardian angels looking after them that day. But can you imagine today, Simon, 3 top jump jockeys being involved in a car crash in which their car overturns, and then getting a lift to the races and riding winners there? Obviously, they'd be stood down. That's how it was. Literally, it's nothing. I've just broken my arm or something. That was the attitude. It was quite remarkable.
And that post-war view of life has been precious. but to be enjoyed because of that probably is behind a lot of these personalities, certainly in the early characters in the book. But what I wanted to bring it a bit further forward is when you started to research people that you felt you already knew. I'm thinking of the Frankhams, the APs. Did you find things out which still surprised you that you hadn't known earlier about them, be it their achievements or them as people?
Well, John Frankham, he was very helpful, gave me a lovely interview for the book, and he sent me a lovely email after I sent him a copy on publication. He said, look, I learned things out about myself that I didn't know. Yeah. And it was great getting stories. I think we tended to see, at the time, one saw the sort of Frankham-Scudamore rivalry as this very contrasting characters. John Frankham, the Jack the Lad, he liked to prank with Smith Eccles. He didn't take it that seriously. And Peter Scud, by contrast, was this very serious-faced man who didn't laugh. He just got out in front. He didn't have a sense of humor. That was the image we had of him. Great rider, but it was like chalk and cheese. But the more you look at those two, the more you realize they had a lot more in common and learnt about them. Peter Scud, it was a great party animal. I don't know if he still is, but I heard a lot of stories about him partying with the other jockeys that didn't fit with the kind of image that I had of him at the time. And equally, John Frankham, yes, he still has a great outlook on life, a laid back outlook on life. But when the tapes were raised, he was as ruthless as anyone. Richard Dunwoody, paid tribute to John, but he said, remember the time he put him out the wings at, was it Ludlow or somewhere like that, when he tried to come on his inside? John, no, you're going out. So John could be very ruthless. And once those tapes were raised, he was every bit as focused and as ruthless about winning as Peter Scudamore was. So Peter Scudamore, much more of a party animal. And again, his persona was quite a fierce, austere one. But as a man, a very kind man, a very popular man, not quite what we thought perhaps at the time. And I think that goes through a lot of them. Terry Biddlecombe, again, is going back a little bit further. Graham Thorner, who rode against Terry, was one of his rivals, pipped him for the championship memorably in 1971. He said he wanted to get over that people have this image of Terry Biddlecombe based on later life, that he was just this sort of very jovial guy who liked to drink and liked the ladies and that sort of thing. But he wasn't, and he used his own phrase, please don't put out that he was just a piss artist, because if he had been a piss artist, yes, Terry and Josh Gifford, the stories about those two, and David Mould, the so-called Three Cavaliers, are legion, what they got up to, extracurricular activities when the racing was finished, partying, wenching, drinking. But Thorner really stressed that Terry, when he knew a job had to be done, was extremely professional. David Gandolfo made that point too, a trainer who Terry rode for. He wouldn't turn up drunk or hungover. He knew when he had to be serious. And he knew when he had to be serious, and when the winning was done, then you could party. But the idea that Terry was all the time he was riding was just drinking all the time, that's not an accurate perception. Later, of course, we know he did have well-publicized alcohol problems, but not even though he liked to drink when he was riding, he was so very much a professional.
So with many of these jockeys, there's the persona and there's the reality. And you kind of delved more into the reality. Just quickly on Scoo, it's interesting you say that, because you did a recent interview with Mike Cattermole for Sky Sports Racing, where he told some great stories. It was really funny. And I was watching it and I thought, do you know, that never came across that side when he broadcasted after his career. It's a real shame he didn't, but now maybe in later life, he's mellowed a little bit. He was really telling you stories about the pipe years, and I mean they were groundbreaking years. My earliest, and somebody I want to ask you about, when I really started getting into racing seriously, and he was another guy with a ruthless streak, was Richard Dunwoody. He was a very private man, a very quiet man, and you got the impression that even people who were riding with him, I remember Brendan Powell saying, sometimes you feel you either know him really well or you don't know him at all. So that aloof, but a guy that was there when it got to 1 o'clock, the first race, he was there to win as many races as he could that day. And if you if you got in his way, you've got in his way.
Yeah.
He must have been an interesting guy to cover, because a very different character to a Frankham, say.
I find him absolutely one of the most fascinating people I've ever interviewed. Richard, I interviewed him first for the Daily Express a few years ago when he was doing that walk across the length of Japan to raise money for medical research. And I was struck then by just what a fascinating individual he was. He gave me the most wonderful interview for the book. He's based in Spain, so it was during the lockdown, so we did it on Skype. And he talked for a long time, and I find it absolutely charming. He couldn't have been more helpful or more nice. Incredibly charming man, and an incredibly interesting man. My admiration for him holds no bounds, really. He is also incredibly honest about his mindset when he was chasing the title. The season, which everybody remembers, of course, was 1993-4, when they had that epic duel. He had that epic duel with Adrian Mccoy. That was the most intense champion jump jockeys title race of all time. When you look back in the 40s and 50s, people didn't really chase the championship that much. I mean, they wanted to win it, but it was, let's have some beers, let's have some fun. Richard Dunwoody versus Adrian Mccoy wasn't about that. It was incredibly ruthless. I've likened it in the book to the wonderful James Hunt, Niki Lauda championship seat in Formula One in 1976, which was the subject of a film. I think Dunwoody and Mccoy would make a great subject for the film. Dunwoody admits openly and honestly that he went over the top that year. He was so driven to win that title that it ruined his marriage. He almost had a mental breakdown. You know, that famous time when he lost, I think it was New Year's Eve at Newbury. He was going to win the race. He made a mistake. I think he came down at the last. Mccoy won. He was in such a mood that night. He was smashing pictures. He was kicking. He was literally banging his head against the wall, literally watching the race time and time again. Huge row with his wife. You know, he was very, very close to the edge, and he admits that. And he says in mitigation, he was pushing himself too hard. He was working for Martin Pipe. That was a very tough job in the sense that they were both very driven men who wanted as many winners as possible. He was exhausted. He was riding out in the mornings. He was going up and down the country in helicopters and all over the place, riding here, there, and everywhere. And he put so much into that. It drained both men at the end of it, and he won the title. Dunwoody went to the wire. And he now, when I interviewed him, Simon, it was interesting for the Express a few years ago. I said to him, you'll be away for the Grand National in Japan. You'll be walking. And he said, I'm not bothered. You know, he was a great TV pundit. He was one of the most insightful TV pundits in racing we've ever had. And he walked away from it. He could have earned a lot of money on TV. But he said to me, I wasn't interested in talking about people riding horses. I wanted to ride the horses.
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk about people riding the horses. I want to do stuff. And that's what he did. However, when I spoke to him for the book last year, he was really enjoying talking about racing again. And you could see he was coming back to the sport, which was nice.
Yeah, it's almost like it was painful for him to be there but not participating, which is what a lot of ex-sportsmen go through.
Yep.
It's always said, oh, we'll just go into the media, but you know, that adrenaline buzz that jump jockeys have almost too much of and probably get addicted to is not going to be replaced by many things. Maybe those great quests were the thing that found him that purpose.
Well, he said to me, you know, he spent the whole of his life since retiring as a jockey trying to get close to that adrenaline that he got when you're going through the back fences at Ascot, or even better, when you're on a horse that's full of running and you know you've got a chance of winning the Grand National and you're coming to second beaches and you're thinking, yes, which is what he did 3 times. West Tip, he fell the first time. Second time, he was on West Tip 1 and then on Mini Homer. So he spent the next 20, 30 years trying to recapture that, whether it was trekking to the North Pole, the South Pole, going in dangerous places like Afghanistan, trekking in the mountains, walking the length and breadth of Japan. He spent his whole time trying to get that buzz back again. And he didn't get that buzz from standing in front of a microphone, chatting to Julian Wilson or Claire Balding about you know, the 350 from Wincanton.
Yeah. Now, before we bring things up to the present day, you and I both know that 90% of people watching are going to want your opinion on the legend that is AP Mccoy.
Mm.
We talk about driven people. Well, he physically was driven everywhere, of course, because he didn't drive hardly. But
yeah.
This was a guy who almost took the mental side of things to areas that not many sportsmen have ever done. And he did it, Neil, over such an incredible long period of time, didn't he? It just is, you know, whether I've sat in the pub and, well, I've sat in the pub and discussed with people why I think the very best Ruby Walsh is a better jockey than AP Mccoy. But that's not the only thing. I'm not sure Ruby Walsh had the same strength to have done it over so many years, and that's not having a go at him. That's a praise of AP Mccoy. So the man, the myth. I mean, how did you personally enjoy writing that section about the great man?
In many cases, it was the hardest section to write because everybody knows the facts, but it really is, as you say, it's just quite remarkable. The most remarkable thing is not that he was driven enough to win a few titles. It was that he kept that his appetite was never satiated. He was as hungry to win that Jockeys Championship in 2013, 14 as he was in 1997, 8. You know, it never wavered. He wanted it as the last year as much as he wanted it the first year, and that was remarkable. Richard Dunwoody, if you read the Richard Dunwoody chapter, then you come across a man incredibly driven, and you think nobody could be as driven as Richard Dunwoody was in that mid-90s period. And then AP McCoy says, "Hold my beer," except he wouldn't because he doesn't drink. But that, and then the next chapter blows that out of the water, really, with what you got with AP, who is a guy who literally is totally obsessed, and he admits it. And he admitted it to me that he did get utterly obsessed about records, about breaking records. And as soon as he broke one, that's it. Next day, I want to break the next one. So I've written the most number of winners. I want to beat Gordon Richards' record. I want to get more winners than Martin Pipe. It was, as soon as he climbed one mountain, there was no real celebration. It was, I've got to climb the next one. And that was what was quite remarkable about AP, was that for 20 years, over 20 years, he had that mindset. And it was a real honor to interview him and him to sort of open up, really, and to admit, looking back, he was like as he was. Of course, Martin Pipe, we have to mention Martin Pipe. Martin Pipe is one of the key figures in the book, because what Martin Pipe did for racing, we can't really underestimate what this man did. He's trained more winners than anybody else in history. And you look at the Jockeys champions from the 80s onwards, every single one of them, until Pipe retires, has been a stable jockey for Martin Pipe. Scu, of course, Richard Dunwoody, and then AP. And Martin Pipe came to the book launch of Champion Jump Jockeys at Chepstow. Couldn't have been more charming, couldn't have been friendlier. And it was lovely to talk to him. And he said that he was literally sleeping with the form book. He was sleeping with the fixture book, the race planning. His wife said, you never switch off. And so Martin Pipe, you can't divorce Scu, Dunwoody and Mccoy from the man that they were working for. There's never been a trainer who was as committed to training winners as much as Martin Pipe was. And he was determined to literally burn the midnight oil to find ways of getting an edge, of training more winners. So it was AP said that. He said, basically, Martin Pipe, I wouldn't have been what I am without Martin Pipe. So his role in those later champions in their careers really can't be underestimated. Without Martin Pipe, you wouldn't have got probably the AP phenomenon.
Yeah, and which is why they used to say you get awarded as the Pipe stable jockey, and you've got your name in pencil on the jockey's title.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, sadly, the only one that didn't was Bridgie. David Bridgewater was the only one who was briefly stable jockey who didn't become the champion. That was the year when Dunwoody beat him. But
I mean, coming full circle on Mccoy, with what we began to talk about, and that their employment is one which guarantees injury, his longevity is even more, frankly, bizarre, isn't it? That he was able to keep. I mean, I remember being at Wetherby one day. I think he rode one for John and he was stood down later. I mean, to be honest, I nearly rang an ambulance myself when he walked by. And then I think he had 2 winners with it. His arm was unnaturally hanging down. I mean, the guy was in a dreadful state, but was riding. riding a half-ton beast over jumps. It's just incredible. And
I mean, you've got to. Sorry, carry on.
I was going to say it's that awful line we won't see his like again. But I mean, do you think we'll ever see anybody dominate?
No, I think there's elements when I interviewed them, Brian Hughes, not just because very similar background, Northern Ireland, very serious, very focused. But there is a strong element of AP McCoy about Brian Hughes, although his riding style is very different. In terms of mentality, I do see in Brian Hughes the sort of mentality that would drive him to win multiple titles.
Yeah.
And his hunger not being satiated. He will just be remorselessly, if he stays clear of major injuries, he's going to chalk up a lot of titles. I think he has that same tunnel vision that AP had.
So Brian Hughes is the reigning champion. Let's bring things up to date. I spoke to you earlier, Neil. I think he's very, very underrated and underwritten about as well, in that he's up there in the north. We're going to talk about the Gold Cup and Cheltenham. Brian Hughes should have a major book of rides in every day at a festival. It's such a shame. I know he's come out with this quote about I'd rather be winning at Sedgefield than finishing halfway down the field at Cheltenham, but I don't believe that. I'm quite happy to say that. Our champion jockey should be at our major festival. It should be a given. And it says a lot about the state of Northern racing, sadly, that he isn't coming here. The domination of the superstar yards and the Irish yards has meant that, what I call mid-range yards, Neil, who might come down here with 4 or 5 chances, are now either coming down with a couple of also runs, or they're not even coming down at all. And the festival landscape has really changed in that. And obviously that's affected our northern-based champion, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all very sad. I mean, I'm a great nostalgic for probably if we carry on talking about the old Cheltenhams, for the Cheltenhams of the 70s and 80s and for most of the 90s, when we did get incredibly strong Northern Challenge. In fact, going to it in my Champions book, because it was reflected in the Champions. I mean, I'd sort of trace it to the late 60s. Dennis Smith becomes champion trainer in 68. And then, of course, we get Gordon Richards and the Ron Barry partnership. Ron Barry, an excellent dual champion jockey in the 70s, followed by John Joe O'Neill breaking every kind of record and winning the Gold Cup, of course, and having a great record at Cheltenham. So we have that period. And then, of course, probably the highest point, Michael Dickinson's first 5 in the Gold Cup in 83. We have great Northern horses, Wayward Lad, Forgive and Forget, in the 80s. And even into the 90s, one of my first racing jobs, Simon, was as the Northern correspondent for a magazine called Odds On.
Oh, yeah,
Some listeners viewers may remember that one. It was ahead of its time, really, on its sort of focus on spread betting, etc. And I was the Northern correspondent in the early 90s. My job was to ring up Northern trainers. And one of the first, I think, to tip and to put down as a horse to follow was Jadami, when I used to ring up Peter Beaumont, who was a lovely man regularly. And that was one of my great successes, really, as a tipster, getting on Jadami early on. And that was, but after Jadami, what happens in terms of the Gold Cup and Cheltenham? It's very sad that we haven't got that Northern Challenge anymore that we used to have. I mean, I was reading that Donald McCain, brilliant season. How many runners is he going to have? Is he going to have 1 or 2? That's about it. Over the whole week. And where's the Northern Challenge coming from? And when you've got the case that you've got a runaway champion jump jockey, Brian Hughes, winning the title again, and he won't be there, he won't be riding the horses that he should be riding there. It's very, very sad. And I think that the Cheltenham Festival, we're all excited about it, but it isn't what it was. And part of that is the fact that you identified the mid-range stables really don't go there with any real hopes, except perhaps picking up a couple of the handicaps. At one point, we had, of course, Sue Smith winning the Ultima last year with a wonderful one, Vintage Clouds. That was great. But apart from that, it's very slim pickings, and it's not really a healthy situation for British racing.
No, it is. It's very, very sad. But we'll worry about that next Saturday, Neil, as they say. Now let's try and get the winners of the Gold Cup. Now, I want to bring things up to date with this year, but I want to ask you about the first Gold Cup winner that kind of took your imagination, that you can remember, had a real impact on you.
It's the 1979 Gold Cup. I remember it so vividly. I was a big Ty Cottage fan, Love this front running chaser. And 79 Gold Cup, I was at school that afternoon and I rushed off to get the bus back home so I could have bought my little transistor radio to listen to it. And I remember running off the bus, putting on the transistor radio and Peter Bromley's commentary. It was snowing. It was a snowstorm where I was, and it was a snowstorm at Cheltenham. It was one of the most incredible Gold Cups ever. And if anybody hasn't watched that, check it out on YouTube. It's a wonderful race. Tide Cottage is absolutely brilliant. He's leading away. You've got this snowstorm. You can't see any of the other horses. And Alverton, ridden by John Joe O'Neill, Mick Easterby's Alverton, is making progress. Coming up, Tide Cottage has still got something in the tank, and of course they come to the last fence, and Tide Cottage crashes down. John Joe O'Neill believes that Alverton kind of eyeballed him. A lot of debate as to whether Tide Cottage would have won had he stayed up. You can watch the video again. He certainly hadn't finished. He would have been a good race towards the line. But Alverton wins that Gold Cup. It was just so dramatic, that race was. I was so upset for Tide Cottage. And then a year later, I was in dream, it was absolute ecstasy when Tide Cottage wins the Gold Cup, in procession in 1980. And the sort of bad luck of 1979 is put right. But then the horrible twist that he's disqualified for that after a banned substance was found in his food. It was very, very harsh. There was no claims that it was deliberate. He was stripped of the race. And it was a very sad aftermath, actually, because the trainer, Dan Moore, died not long afterwards. The owner, Tony Robinson, died of cancer that year. And he had the task, great sportsman. He was dying of cancer at Stratford Racecourse. He had to hand over the trophy to, I think it was Arthur Burrow, the trainer of Master Smudge, which was the horse well beaten. So that was just an incredible thing you couldn't make up. Of course, the other sad thing about that was Alverton, brilliant winner of the Gold Cup, loses his life 3 weeks later in the Grand National in a fall at Second Beaches. So, but for drama, I think that whole period was quite incredible, and that really hooked me onto the Cheltenham Gold Cup.
Yeah, and because you've had all year to think about these, you're so emotionally invested in a race like that. I think that's so powerful. I mean, I want to take you to 1989, my first Gold Cup, really. Another bleak, horrible day when Desi, there was a shot of Desi and the other Ellsworth horse. Was it Cavi's Clown? Cavi's Clown, yep. That was stood at the start, and you almost thought they were, in equine terms, saying to each other, "I don't really fancy it."
Whose idea is this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, of course, Desi, as Ellsworth has always said, was a stone worse horse at Cheltenham. He didn't like jumping undulations. Ellsworth was convinced. And those great high Desi jumps, of course, are ones you don't want to be doing when there's a steep fall on the other side of the fence. So he thinks he didn't let himself stride on like he did at a Kempton or a Sandown. But he won that on sheer class, that Gold Cup from the last, on ground that's probably a bit too soft for him. And I think it was, in many ways, his kind of greatest performance. I mean, he's a horse who won over 2 miles, but was good enough to win over 4 in Ireland. He was, but this was his Gold Cup. This was his year. I mean, have you any memories of that year?
Absolutely. I mean, that I still put that down as the greatest day's racing I've ever been at a race course. I still get goose pimples, Simon, when I watch that video again. It was just the most remarkable day to be there. I was there. I went with my father and my uncle. It was, the weather was just, you couldn't make it up. It was snowing, it was sleeting, it was bitterly cold, it was rain and sleet again. And I remember us stopping outside Cheltenham. Would it be on? And would Desi run? Because there was a lot of conjecture that they wouldn't run the horse. It was a very big decision they had to make because, as you said, everything looked to be against him. It wasn't his track anyway. He was a stone worse off there. The ground had gone against him. A lot of people were worried about the horse's safety. The cup, those fences in those days, that third last, as we know, as tragically 10 Plus lost his life in that race. So it was a tough call. If anything had happened to Desi, then there would have been, repercussions and it would have been very bad for racing. So it was a brave call to run the horse. And for him to win that race, as you said, class, it was guts. He just, incredible how he rallied again to beat the gallant Yahoo, one of the great supporting acts in national history. I think it was just an incredible day. And the tingle you got from that, look, I'll never ever forget, you were there, the crowd, it was a relief. It was the joy, people talking to each other. It was just amazing. I was on a high after that race for months and months afterwards. It was just so incredibly uplifting, even though, as I said, sadly, there was the tragic loss of 10 plus as well. The bittersweet nature of National Hunt racing. It was just a day that nobody was there will ever forget as long as they live.
No, and 10 plus would have gone on to be a great champion.
Yeah.
But right. We've had a great conversation here, Neil. And anyone who's got any interest at all in Cheltenham or jump jockeys or the crazy world of jumps racing would be, I think, insane not to get your book. And there'll be a link.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
And we could go on, but I must ask you about the battle to come and this year's Gold Cup. Now, we're recording this on Sunday, and as it stands, Galvin and A+ Tard are joint favourites now at 7-2. Now, we've chatted before, and I know we're both Galvin fans in the context of this year's race, but why are you leaning towards Galvin?
Well, I mean, the last few years I've written these so-called intelligent punters guys to the Cheltenham Festival. They've had a good record, and I'm a big trends man. And if you look at the trends, he ticks all the right boxes. Age, he's 8-year-old. We've had, I think, 6 of the last 9 winners have been 8. We've only had, 2 9-year-old winners, two winners older than 8 in the last 10 years. It's the age you really want to be is 7, 8 to win that race. And the stats also show that there is a big advantage for horses coming there the first time, winning on the first time. Yes, of course, Native River bucked that trend. He was beaten in the race in 2017, wasn't he? And then won it in 2018. But generally speaking, it's your first year that's your best chance of winning the Gold Cup, as it is to do with the Grand National. And on top of all of that, he's got festival form. He won the National Hunt Chase, which Native River also won before he won the Gold Cup. So we know he acts around the course. The negative about, well, I say negative, I don't think it is one, is people say, well, he's won the National Hunt Chase. Is he going to be quick enough? He won the big race in Ireland over 3 miles over Christmas. So, and Gordon Elliott, it's very stressed how well he travels in his races. So he should be able to hold a position, even if we don't get any more rain. So I think he ticks all the stats, all the trends boxes. I mean, A+ Tard is the joint favourite. Ran a great race to be second last year. He's been second at the last 2 festivals. He's going to be there or thereabouts, let's face it. He would be coming back to win the race, having been beaten in it. We saw Native River, you can do that. You wouldn't rule that out happening. But of the 2, I just marginally prefer Galvin because, as I said, he has ticks in all the right boxes.
If Alboom Photo wins on Friday, he will have won his 3rd Gold Cup. And you could argue needs to join the sort of pantheon of great horses. He's just not grabbed the public's attention or the media's attention. It's very, very strange because he's got the connections to be out there as a superstar. And yet, you could say in equine terms, he could walk down the high street and nobody'd know who he was.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, and I try to put my finger on what it is. He's not flashy. Could be that. Is it to do with the fact he rarely runs? He's not building up that thing, the Mullins, the sort of Quivega syndrome, where the modern trend of bringing a horse out once or twice a year. Is it that? But should he win, Neil, and he's got a chance, it wouldn't be my selection, but he rightly should surely start getting some love from the racing public.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I remember when he won his first Gold Cup, my mother, who's in her 90s, rang me up. She said, I want to back this horse Album Photo, because I was looking at the photograph album last night, put some money on it. And of course, it won at 12 to 1. It's my mum's favourite horse of all time now, I think. So it has got a few fans. I think you're right. It's been underrated. Number of factors, of course, running so rarely, just having the New Year's Day run and then heading to Cheltenham doesn't help him establish him in the public consciousness. I think that if he were to win a 3rd Gold Cup, obviously that puts him right up there with Best Mate, with 3 wins, with Arkle. So you've got to say that he has been underrated. And I think that looking at this year's current odds, I think at 10 to 1, he certainly warrants an each way bet, because there were legitimate reasons. I think last year Willie Mullins was disappointed. They were fancying him to go to win it for the third time last year. Where position he got into, the way the race was run, the vibes have been very good about him this year. It's a big ask, you know, to win 2 Gold Cups, then lose one, and then come back again. I mean, we all know Cordo Star won the Gold Cup, lost it, and then won it again. The stat against him is he's 10, and 10-year-olds in modern Gold Cups generally don't win at that age. But I think at 10 to 1 to finish in the first 3, that's a fair bet at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't put anybody off. And yeah, you're right. He's now becoming a slightly elderly to be winning Gold Cups. I'm a Galvin man. I think, like you say, he had the pace to win over 3 miles at Christmas, so I don't buy that he hasn't got enough speed. He's got further to run and an uphill. Both him and Album Photo would probably prefer softer ground to show their very best. I think Protectorate is a potential fly in the ointment, but what you've got to, if you take the form literally of what he did to an Aintree specialist, that is our horse, a Gold Cup winner, then you have to think he's an absolute monster. But I'm just a bit wary about that Aintree form. If it's bang on, then I think he's a great price at 8 to 1. But
I mean, it all depends on what you thought of Native River this season. I mean, obviously, he was pulled up. He was never travelling in the Welsh National, and they very wisely pulled him up as a grand servant. Was he already gone at the game, if you like, at that level when he went to Aintree? Was this already one season too many for him, if you like? And the Welsh National would suggest that may have been the case. I mean, to have done that to the Native River of a year ago, you know, he did run a blinder, didn't he, when he won the rescheduled Cotswold Chase at Sandown, it was run at. And then, of course, he ran great races in the Gold Cup to be placed, and also third in the big race at Aintree. So it all depends what line you take, how much Native River deteriorated. I was there at Aintree at Beach Chase Day, and hugely impressive Protector. And as you say, he's a fly in the ointment. Yeah.
I think it's going to be it's always a great race. I think it's going to be a fascinating renewal.
It is. And there's always going to be one horse, Simon, isn't there, that's at bigger odds, that surprises us by getting placed or running, you know, tree out looking like it could be winning. There's always a sort of screamer in there, isn't there? A sort of giant bolster or
I'd love I Right to run a huge race.
You could well do. You know, you always get one of them coming around, don't you? 3 to go. There's one that's running much better than his odds would suggest, and he could be the one.
Yeah, it's going to be a great year. Well, thank you, Neil, and thank you for sharing some of the Jump Jockeys.
Thanks, Simon.
There's a link to the book, and as I've just said, anybody who's got any interest at all in this game, get it.
Hold it up here if anybody.
There it is.
See that? Yeah.
So, thank you for sharing those stories and getting them into one volume as well, Neil, because I think that
pleasure writing the book. It was such a good thing, and the feedback I've had has been terrific.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, well, thanks for sharing it. Have a great week.
Yes, so you too, yeah.
Yeah, we'll catch up soon. So, and Holden Sources viewers, I will be back with my festival strategies final video of Cheltenham on Monday evening. But for now, a huge thanks to Neil Clark. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Simon. All the best.
Yeah.
Have a good week.